Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Host Imagine Walls That Could Speak. What stories would they tell? Not of brick and mortar, but of the lives lived and lost within them. Now imagine those walls belong to a place like this, an abandoned asylum, a monument to forgotten suffering. Today we're stepping into those very shadows, unraveling the eerie narratives that still echo within their decaying halls. We're going to listen to what they have to say. Are you ready to hear their stories? Host, what if the screams of the past never truly faded? What if they were recorded, not on tape, but into the very fabric of the building itself, waiting for the right conditions, the right kind of silence to be played back? We're about to explore a terrifying, fictional history behind one of America's most infamous asylums, delving into an unsettling psychiatric experiment and the lingering presence it left behind. Get ready to question everything you thought you knew about these places and about the nature of a haunting. Host, this is a long and immersive story, a descent into the heart of a snowbound nightmare. So find a quiet place, maybe put on some headphones, and prepare for part 1 of the Pennhurst protocol. As we explore these whispering walls together, I want to hear from you. In the comments below, tell me about a place that has given you an unsettling feeling or a local legend that still gives you chills. Your stories help build our community of curiosity and fear. And if you appreciate these deep narrative dives, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel for more journeys into the unknown. Don't forget to let me know what kind of story you want me to read next. Your ideas are the blueprint for our next exploration. Host, now, let the silence speak.
The silence inside Pennhurst was a living thing. It was thick and heavy, woven from decades of dust, decay, and forgotten despair. Liam had explored dozens of abandoned places, factories, theaters, hospitals, but the silence in an asylum was different. It wasn't empty. It was full. It pressed in on him, a physical weight on his eardrums, a bass note of dread thrumming just below the range of human hearing. This was the sound he had come to capture. He set his equipment down in the center of what had once been a vast, sunlit day room. Now, the floor was a treacherous mosaic of peeling lead paint, fallen plaster, and the ghostly outlines where furniture had once stood. A brutalist winter sun, low and bright in the January sky, streamed through the towering, arched windows, each one weeping trails of rust from its corroded iron frames. The light did little to warm the cavernous space. Liam's breath plumed in thick white clouds, and the cold was a constant, gnawing ache in his fingers and toes. Outside, a pristine blanket of snow, 6 inches deep and growing, muffled the world, amplifying the profound, internal quiet of the asylum. Liam was not a ghost hunter. He scoffed at the EVP recorders and spirit boxes used by paranormal investigators. He considered himself an acoustic archivist of desolate spaces. His equipment was top of the line, a multi-channel sound devices field recorder, and a meticulously placed array of hypersensitive microphones, shotguns, contact mics, and a binaural dummy head he'd nicknamed Herman, all designed to capture the subtle, infrasonic groans of a dying building. He was creating an audio library of decay, a symphony of architectural ghosts. Pennhurst State School and Hospital was to be his masterpiece. He'd spent the morning setting up, running cables through dusty corridors, placing contact mics on strained support beams, and frosted window pane. The blizzard, which had been a mere forecast when he'd slipped through a gap in the perimeter fence before dawn, was now a reality. The snow was falling in thick, hypnotic sheets, and the wind was beginning to keen around the institution's many gables and broken cupola. He knew he should be concerned, but a part of him, the artist, was thrilled. The storm would provide the ultimate isolation, the perfect acoustic quarantine. With his base camp established in the day room, he decided to do a final survey. He left Herman to his silent vigil, donned his headlamp, and ventured deeper into the asylum's labyrinthine west wing, a section he hadn't yet explored. The air grew colder as he moved away from the large windows, the corridors becoming tunnels of shadow and frost. His footsteps crunching on frozen debris were the only sound. It was in a long disused administrative hallway that he found the door. It was different from the other. While most doors in Pennhurst were either hanging off their hinges or had been removed entirely, this one was heavy oak, reinforced with steel bands, and fitted with a high-security lock that was now a solid chunk of rust. A small, grimy wire mesh window was set into the wood at eye level, but its most peculiar feature was the sign, bolted to the door with tamper-proof screw. In stark, clinical, sans-serif font, it read, Auditory and Resonance Therapy Wing. The Pennhurst Protocol, Research Division, access strictly prohibited, bioacoustic hazard. Liam's heart, which had been beating in a slow, steady rhythm, gave a sudden excited This wasn't on any of the publicly available floor plans for Pennhurst. The term bioacoustic hazard was bizarre, something he'd expect to see on a military base, not a mid-century asylum. He shone his headlamp on the lock. It was formidable, but the door frame around it had succumbed to decades of moisture and rot. He holstered his flashlight and wedged his gloved fingers into the gap. He pulled, grunting with effort, the frozen wood groaning in protest. With a final violent heave, a large section of the rotted frame splintered and tore away. The door swung inward with a low, mournful groan, opening a gateway into a part of the hospital that had been sealed for a very long time. The air that billowed out was different. It was colder, drier, and carried a faint, antiseptic scent, layered over the pervasive odor of decay, a ghost of bleach and old paper. He stepped inside, his light cutting a sharp, bright cone through the absolute darkness. He was in a reception area. A thick carpet of dust covered everything, a perfect, gray, undisturbed blanket. There were no footprints, no graffiti, no signs of the usual urban explorers and vandals, who had picked over the rest of Pennhurst like vultures. This place had been forgotten. He moved deeper, his boots leaving the first tracks this place had seen in half a century. The wing was a self-contained unit. Offices, a small laboratory and a central observation room, with a large, double-paned glass window looking into a series of small soundproofed chambers. The chambers were Spartan, each containing only a single, heavy iron bed frame and a large, bell-shaped speaker, mounted high in the corner. It was in the main office that he found the archive. Metal filing cabinets stood against one wall, their drawers sealed with strips of brittle, yellowed tape. Liam, feeling a tremor of discovery that was almost sacred, sliced through the tape on one drawer with his utility knife, and pulled. It opened with a loud, metallic shriek that was sacrilege in the crushing silence. Inside were hundreds of patient files, but these were unlike any he had ever seen described in the asylum's official histories. Each file was thick with audio analysis charts, oscillograms, and pages of typed notes. He pulled one out. The patient's name was redacted, but the diagnosis was clear: chronic auditory hysteria, with paranoid fixations. The patient, a young woman, claimed to hear constant critical whispers coming from the walls. He scanned the notes, his eyes widening. The Pennhurst Protocol was a radical, experimental therapy developed in the early 1960s by a Dr. Alistair Finch. Finch's theory was monstrous in its simplicity. He believed that the auditory hallucinations of his patients were not random, but were tuned to a specific personal resonant frequency. His cure was to isolate the patient, record their descriptions of the voices they heard, and then, using a team of voice actors and cutting-edge audio equipment, recreate those whispers. He would then play the amplified, personalized sounds back to the patient for hours on end, at a specific, low frequency, believing he could overload their senses and essentially short-circuit the hallucination, forcing the brain to reject the signal. He was fighting whispers with a shout. Liam felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't therapy, it was psychological torture. He flipped through the file, the pages filled with terrifying clinical detachment. Subject displays extreme distress, clawing at her ears, screaming that the whispers are inside her head. The final entry was dated January 17th, 19. This was more than just the sound of decay. This was the recorded, documented history of human suffering. A new purpose for his expedition was crystallizing in his mind. He had to document this. He had to bring these stories to life. He went back to the day room, the falling snow now a thick white curtain outside the windows, and gathered his gear. He would move his base of operations into the sealed wing. He brought Herman, the binaural dummy head, and placed him in the chair in the central observation room. His glass and silicone ears aimed at the soundproofed chambers. He set up a shotgun mic in the hallway, and a contact mic on the filing cabinet itself. He wanted to capture every nuance of this dead, silent place. As dusk began to settle, turning the snowy landscape outside into a soft blue-gray canvas, he sat in Dr. Finch's chair, put on his best pair of sound-isolating headphones, and plugged into the live feed from the dummy head. He closed his eyes, ready to immerse himself in the pure, unadulterated silence of the forgotten wing. At first, that was all there was, the deep, profound quiet he had expected, layered with the faint, almost imperceptible groan of the building, settling under the growing weight of the snow. He adjusted the gain, amplifying the signal, making the tiny sounds of the asylum bloom in his ears, the scuttling of a mouse in the walls, the distant sigh of wind through a broken window pane somewhere in the main building, the delicate tick of freezing moisture on metal. These were the sounds he knew, the sounds he loved. Then he heard it. It was impossibly faint, a whisper of a whisper, hiding beneath the hiss of the amplified silence. He cranked the gain higher, his brow furrowed in concentration. The sound was layered, complex. It was the soft, sibilant murmur of a human voice, a woman's voice. It wasn't clear enough to make out words, just the cadence, the rhythm of speech. It was coming from the direction of the first soundproofed chamber. His rational mind kicked in immediately. It was the wind, carrying a sound from miles away. It was radio frequency interference from his own equipment. It was his own brain, playing tricks on him in the sensory deprivation of the silence. But as he listened, the whisper grew, not in volume but in clarity. It was a loop, he realized, the same short, desperate-sounding phrase over and over. He strained, filtering out the hiss, focusing all his attention on that single ghostly signal. And then, for a brief, heart-stopping moment, the whisper became perfectly clear, as if a woman were standing right next to the dummy head, her lips brushing against its silicone ear. "It's not in the wall," it whispered. "It's in the silence." The voice cut out, replaced by a sharp crackle of static that made Liam rip the headphones from his ears, his heart hammering against his ribs. The observation room was silent again, the only sound his own ragged breathing. He looked at the binaural head, Herman sitting impassively in the chair. He looked at the thick, double-paned glass of the observation window, at the dark, empty chamber beyond. The blizzard raged outside, sealing him in. He was alone in a tomb of failed science and forgotten screams, and his equipment, designed to capture the sounds of a dying building, was starting to pick up the voices of its ghosts. The Pennhurst protocol was over, but for the first time, Liam was terrified of the silence it had left behind. Static hissed in his discarded headphones, like a nest of snakes. Liam scrambled back from the console, his chair skittering across the dusty floor, his heart a frantic, panicked drum against his ribs. He stared at the spot where the whisper had manifested, the empty space beside the impassive, seated form of Herman. The silence of the room rushed back in, vast and absolute. His first instinct was denial, a desperate search for a logical foothold in the rising tide of fear. "RF bleed," he muttered, his voice sounding thin and alien in the dead air. "Radio frequency interference, a stray signal from a trucker's CB or a distant station, bouncing off the storm." It was plausible. His gear was sensitive, and a blizzard could play havoc with atmospheric conditions. He had to be rational. He was a scientist, a documentarian, not a terrified child in the dark. He forced himself to approach the console, his movements stiff and deliberate. He picked up the headphones, the plastic cool against his trembling fingers, and put them back on. The familiar, low hiss of the amplified silence greeted him. No whispers, no voices. He checked the recorder's display. No telltale spikes in the radio frequency bands. No anomalies. The machine had recorded the sound, a clean, inexplicable signal in the audio spectrum. It was there, a ghost in the machine. He saved the recording, labeling it Anomaly Year 1, his hands moving with the practiced calm of his profession, a routine that felt absurd under the circumstances. He couldn't debunk it, he couldn't explain it, but he could contextualize it. The whisper was a piece of data. To understand it, he needed more information. His gaze fell upon the patient file he'd left on the desk, the one that had started this. The woman who heard whispers in the wall, driven now by a chilling new purpose. He turned his attention back to the filing cabinets. If the patient files were here, where were the doctor's own notes? Where was the research, the raw data, behind the monstrous protocol? He moved to the largest cabinet, the one marked Principal Investigator Archives, Dr. A. Finch. The drawers were locked, not with tape, but with a heavy-duty combination lock. It was an old mechanical model, the kind that was susceptible to a patient hand. Liam had acquired a few less than legal skills in his years of exploring restricted places. He pressed his ear to the cold metal of the drawer, his fingers deft on the dial, listening for the faint, telltale click of the tumblers. The profound silence of the wing, which had been a source of terror moments before, was now a tool. He could hear the machine's inner workings with perfect clarity. After a tense few minutes, the final tumbler fell into place with a satisfying thunk. The lock popped open. The drawer did not contain files. It was filled with dozens of grey, cardboard boxes, each housing a 7-inch reel-to-reel audio tape. The labels were typed, stark and clinical. Protocol Session 1A, Patient 12, Tone Calibration. Protocol Session 2C, Patient 12, Vocal Recreation. This was the raw audio of the experiments. But at the very back of the drawer was a smaller, leather-bound box containing a series of tapes labeled differently. A. Finch, Personal Audio Log, January 1964. Liam's breath hitched. He had found the ghost's own diary in the small, forgotten lab next to the office. He found a vintage Ampex reel-to-reel player on a dusty workbench. It looked like a museum piece, but these machines were built like tanks. He wiped away the shroud of dust, powered it up, and was rewarded with the faint, warm, amber glow of its vacuum tubes. He threaded the first of Dr. Finch's personal logs, the magnetic tape, a fragile brown ribbon of history. He plugged his headphones directly into the machine's output, isolating himself from the live microphones, and pressed play. The speakers hissed for a moment, and then a voice filled his ears. A voice from 50 years ago, preserved perfectly in the magnetic oxide. It was crisp, confident, and steeped in the casual baritone authority of a mid-century academic. Dr. Alistair Finch, Personal Log, January 10, 1964. The blizzard is an unexpected boon. The level of ambient silence it provides is unprecedented. It creates the perfect baseline, a truly blank canvas for the work. Patient 12, the subject of the initial protocol trials, continues to be a fascinating case. Her delusion is remarkably specific. She claims the building itself speaks to her, that the whispers emanate not from a void but from the very materials of her confinement. The plaster, the iron, the glass, an architectural haunting, localized entirely within her own psyche. Liam's blood ran cold. An architectural haunting. The description was unnervingly close to his own professional pursuit. My hypothesis remains firm, Finch's voice continued, smooth and self-assured. Her mind is not generating these signals, merely receiving them. It is a radio tuned to a phantom station. My task is to find the frequency of that station and jam the signal. Today we began the tone calibrations. We exposed her to a series of low-frequency sine waves, starting at 100 Hz and moving downward. The goal is to find the specific resonant frequency that agitates her hallucinatory state, the key that unlocks her delusion. The recording shifted. Liam could hear the low, clean hum of a sine wave tone generator. It was followed by the muffled, frantic screaming of a woman. Negative reaction at 60 Hz. As expected, standard electrical hum paranoia. Finch narrated, his voice calm and detached over the patient's cries. 50 Hz, 40. Nothing. But then, at approximately 19 Hz, the subject became ecstatic. She stopped screaming and began whispering to the walls, as if in conversation. She claims the whispers were becoming clearer, that they were happy we were listening. We have found the key. 19 Hz, the very edge of human hearing, a frequency that is often felt as much as it is heard, a sense of unease, of a presence just beyond perception. Infrasound, the so-called ghost frequency. As Finch spoke the words 19 Hz, a new sound bled into Liam's headphones. It wasn't from the tape, it was from the live feed. A low, almost subsonic hum was being picked up by the microphones scattered throughout the wing. He toggled his input, switching back to the live mics. The hum was there, a deep, vibrating thrum that seemed to make his teeth butt. He looked at his recorder's spectral analysis display. A thin, sharp spike was blooming on the screen, centered at exactly 19 Hz. It was impossible. There was nothing in the wing that could be generating that frequency. He was miles from any operating power grid or heavy machinery. The hum was coming from the building itself. Finch's voice suddenly said on the tape, the coincidence so perfect it made Liam flinch. The hum in Liam's headphones intensified. The contact mic on the filing cabinet began to vibrate, the needle on its input channel quivering in the Asylum was vibrating, resonating with that impossible 19 Hz tone. The blizzard wasn't just trapping him. It was an active participant. It was recreating the exact environmental conditions of the original experiment. He was no longer just an observer, listening to a recording of the past. He was inside the recording, living it. The tape, the storm, and the building were locked in a terrifying feedback loop, and he was at the center. With a growing sense of dread, he switched his audio feed back to the binaural head, to Herman, his proxy in the observation room. He needed to know if the whisper had returned. He closed his eyes and listened. There was only the deep resonant hum, a vibration that seemed to worm its way through his skull. He listened for a full minute, the tension coiling in his gut. Then through the hum, a new sound emerged. It was the whisper from before, but the looped, frantic quality was gone. This was different. It was calm, close, articulate. It was no longer a fragmented echo. It was a clear, coherent thought, spoken directly into Herman's ear. "I know you're listening," it whispered, the voice a silken, terrifying thread in the deep, vibrating silence. And then, as if to prove it, it said his name. Liam. He tore the headphones off, a strangled cry escaping his lips. In the dead silence of the lab, he could still feel the 19 Hz hum, a phantom vibration in the bones of his skull. He was breathing in ragged gasps, his eyes wide with terror, staring at the reel-to-reel player, as Finch's voice continued to drone on from the discarded headphone. He wasn't just hearing the Asylum's ghosts, he was being targeted by them. The protocol, dormant for 50 years, had found a new patient. The name echoed in the meat of his memory. Liam, a single word, spoken in a silken, impossible whisper, had shattered the foundations of his reality. He scrambled away from the workbench, his boots slipping on the dusty concrete, his back hitting the cold, tiled wall of the lab with a hard thump. The reel-to-reel player continued its placid rotation, spooling out a dead man's thoughts into the vibrating air. Panic was a physical thing, a coiling knot of ice in his gut. His training, his scientific skepticism, his carefully constructed worldview, all of it was useless noise against the perfect, terrifying clarity of that one spoken word. It knew him. Escape. The thought was a primal scream in his mind. He had to get out of this wing, out of this building, out into the blizzard's clean, brutal chaos. He grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight, his only tool that felt like a weapon, and fled the lab, leaving the ghost of Dr. Finch to narrate to an empty room. He half ran, half stumbled through the dusty, shadow-choked corridors, his headlamp beam bouncing wildly, painting fractured, moving tableaus of decay on the walls. The deep, 19 Hz hum was a constant pressure against his skull, a silent, unseen current he was fighting his way through. He reached the heavy oak door, the one he had forced open hours, or a lifetime ago. His escape route. He put his shoulder to it, expecting it to swing into the relative safety of the main asylum. It didn't budge. It was as solid as the wall it was set in. Confused, He shone his flashlight on the edges, a thick, crystalline web of ice, an inch thick and impossibly clear, had fused the door to its splintered frame. It wasn't just frost. It was a solid weld of ice, formed from the inside out, in a hallway that was already well below freezing. The unnatural cold he'd felt radiating from the wing earlier had become a physical barrier. He slammed his shoulder against it again, and then again, the impacts doing nothing but sending jolts of pain up his arm. He kicked at it, his heavy winter boot making a dull, unsatisfying thud. Nothing. The door was sealed. The blizzard, the entity, the building itself. They had conspired to lock him in. The place he had broken into had become his tomb. He slumped against the frozen door, his breath coming in ragged, painful sobs. Trapped. The word was a final damning judgment. He was a specimen in a jar, a rat in a cage designed by a mad doctor and haunted by his failed experiments. He stayed there for an undetermined time, lost in a feedback loop of terror and despair. But as the adrenaline of his panic began to subside, it was replaced by the cold, analytical part of his mind, the archivist, who had been momentarily suppressed. It was that part of him that rose, dusted the frost from his clothes, and began to think. The entity hadn't harmed him. It had observed him, identified him, and spoken to him. It had sealed his exit. These were not the random, chaotic actions of a mindless ghost. They were controlled, deliberate. They were responses. He was the variable. His presence, his equipment, his act of listening. He had disturbed a dormant system, and it was now reacting to his every move. The observer effect. In science, the act of observing a phenomenon inevitably changes. He had come here to observe the silence, but in doing so, he had given it a voice. He looked back down the dark corridor, towards the lab, where Finch's voice was still a faint murmur. A new, terrifying thought began to form, a piece of logic, as cold and sharp as the ice on the door. He was trapped inside the experiment. The protocol, which had failed on patient 12, was now active again. The building was the laboratory, the blizzard was the catalyst, and he, Liam, was the new subject. A fresh wave of fear washed over him, but this one was different. It was colder, sharper, laced with a sliver of defiant anger. If he was the subject of an experiment, then he refused to be a passive one. He was not patient 12. He was a scientist in his own right. He would not claw at his ears until he fell into catatonia. He would turn his own methods back on the ghost. He would take control of the observation. He would make the entity his subject. With a grim, newfound resolve, he walked back to the control room. The 19 hertz hum seemed to pulse around him, a silent, mocking welcome. He didn't avoid it. He listened to it, analyzed it. It was strongest near the soundproof chambers, weakest near the outer walls. It had a source. He began to work, his movements now precise and economical. He was no longer an archivist. He was an investigator setting up a paranormal sting operation. He took a small, powerful, omnidirectional microphone, one he usually used for capturing ambient room tone, and set it up on the console in front of his chair. He routed its signal into the recorder, creating a channel for his own voice. He was adding himself to the mix. He sat down in the operator's chair, the worn leather cool against his back. He looked through the thick glass at the empty iron bed frame in chamber 1, the source of the original whisper. He looked at Herman, his silent, listening partner. He took a deep, steadying breath, his heart a slow, heavy drum. He put on the headphones. The deep, vibrating hum filled his ears, a tangible, physical presence. He toggled the input, listening to the feed from the binaural. He waited, letting the silence and the infrasound saturate his senses. The whisper did not return. It was waiting. It knew he was about to do something. It was listening to him now. He switched on his own microphone. The small record light on the console glowed a defiant "My name is Liam," he said, his voice surprisingly steady as it boomed in his own headphones. "I know you're here. I'm recording this. I want to ask you a question." He paused, the silence that answered him more profound than anything he had ever recorded. The hum seemed to dip for a moment, as if the building itself were holding its breath. "Who are you?" he asked, directing his voice towards the empty chamber. For a long time, there was nothing, only the incessant, vibrating hum. He began to think it was a foolish, desperate act, a man talking to himself in a tomb. He had been wrong. There was nothing there but old sounds and his own overwrought imagination. Then, the whisper came. It was not in one ear, like before. It was in both. It was everywhere. A dry, sibilant voice that seemed to generate itself from the very fabric of the hum. The question is not who, it whispered, its voice perfectly clear, imbued with a cold, ancient intelligence. But what? I am the silence that listens. I am the pattern in the noise. I am the protocol. Liam's throat went dry. It was not the ghost of a patient. It was the experiment itself, a sentient, malevolent idea that had somehow achieved a form of consciousness. What happened to patient 12? Liam asked, his voice now trembling slightly. She was the first, the whisper replied, a hint of something that might have been satisfaction in its tone. The key. Her mind was so open, so attuned to the building's voice. Finch thought he was programming her, but she was programming him. The whisper paused. Liam heard a faint, new sound from the reel-to-reel player in the next room. Finch's voice, still playing on a loop. The doctor wanted to jam the signal. The entity continued, the whisper seeming to coil around the distant sound of Finch's narration. A foolish goal. You cannot silence a sound that is already a part of you. He listened for too long. He tuned his own mind to our frequency. In the end, he didn't stop the experiment. He completed it. He joined it. He is the anchor. Liam stared through the glass, his mind reeling. Finch hadn't failed. He had become a part of his own machine, his consciousness absorbed into the fabric of the asylum's resonant hum. He was the ghost in the machine. And now you want me, Liam whispered, the statement a horrified realization, not a question. The hum intensified dramatically. The physical pressure in his skull doubled, making the room seem to warp at the edges of his vision. The whisper was no longer a silken thread. It was a roar of static, a hurricane of sibilant sound that scraped at his eardrum. You came here to capture the sound of a dying building, Liam. The voice hissed, its predatory intent now naked and absolute. You will stay to become a part of its voice. As the static roared, a new sound cut through the chaos, picked up by the contact mic on the filing cabinet in the next room. It was a sharp, frantic noise from inside the locked drawer where Finch's personal logs were kept. It was the sound of scratch, desperate, frantic scratching, as if something inside the drawer, something that had been silent for 50 years, was suddenly violently trying to get out.
The scratching stopped. The silence that replaced it was a vacuum, charged with a terrifying, imminent potential. The handle on the filing cabinet drawer ceased its slow, impossible turn. The entire wing held its breath. Liam was frozen, his gaze locked on the drawer, a dark metal mouth in the flickering lamplight of his headlamp. He was no longer just an observer. He was the audience for a performance that had been waiting 50 years for its curtain to rise. Slowly, with a final protesting groan of tortured metal, the drawer slid open another 6 inches on its own, and then stopped. From the profound, humming darkness within, a single object moved. A 7-inch reel of audio tape, detached from its box, slid smoothly out of the drawer, as if pushed by an invisible hand. It rolled across the dusty top of the cabinet and came to a stop just at the edge, perfectly framed in a shaft of bright, snowy sunlight from the window. Unlike the others, this tape had no typed label. A single strip of white medical tape was wrapped around the reel, and on it, a frantic, spidery scrawl in black ink, barely legible. Final log. Containment of failure. God help me. This was not an audio log. It was a message in a bottle, thrown into an ocean of silence. This was Finch's last will and testament. The predatory hum of the wing seemed to recede, to quiet itself in anticipation. The entity, the protocol, wanted him to listen. It was a predator playing with its food, confident that this final revelation would break him, proving its absolute power. It was a fatal act of hubris. Liam moved as if in a dream. The fear was still there, a cold, hard stone in his stomach,
but it was now overlaid with the archivist's insatiable need to know the end of the story. He picked up the tape. The plastic reel was unnaturally cold, radiating the same deep, cellular chill as the ice on the door. He walked back to the lab, his steps measured, the Ampex player waiting for him like a gallows. He unthreaded the previous tape, Finch's calm, academic voice falling silent, and carefully spooled the final log. He didn't hesitate. He put on the headphones, the familiar weight of strange comfort, and pressed play. This, he knew, was the heart of the haunting. A burst of harsh, crackling static, followed by the sound of a heavy, ragged breath. A man on the verge of weeping. This was Dr. Alistair Finch. The voice was almost unrecognizable. The confident, baritone authority was gone, replaced by a raw, terrified whisper, hoarse and broken. The date is irrelevant. The storm has not stopped. The protocol, God, the protocol. It's not a therapy, it's a virus, a bioacoustic virus. Liam leaned closer, his knuckles white, where he gripped the edge of the workbench. It doesn't cure the hallucination, Finch rasped, his words punctuated by frantic, paranoid glances, the sounds of which were perfectly captured by the microphone. It hijacks it. It uses the patient's mind as a broadcast tower. It's not a sound, you see. It's a signal, a self-replicating pattern. Patient 12, she wasn't the subject. She was the seed, the first voice. She didn't get better. She got louder. The hum in Liam's headphones began to build again. A low, menacing growl. The entity did not like its secrets being told. I listened too much, Finch cried, his voice breaking. I was so focused on finding the key, the frequency. I didn't realize it was a resonant lock, waiting for my own mind to turn it. The whispers, her whispers, they're not in the walls anymore. They're in me. It's using my memories, my knowledge. It's building itself inside my head. A loud bang echoed on the tape, as if Finch had slammed his fist on his desk. But it has a weakness, he suddenly shouted, his voice a brief flare of defiance. It needs stability. The 19 Hz frequency is its backbone, its entire structure. The resonance must be perfect, the environment stable. To destroy it, you have to break the resonance. You have to introduce disharmony, a counter signal, phase cancellation, an inverted wave. You could erase it. Finch's voice trailed off into a series of wet, choking sobs. The confident scientist was gone, replaced by a broken man being consumed from the inside out. It's too late for me, he whispered, the final words on the tape. It's singing inside my bones. Don't let it. The sentence was cut off, not by static, but by the clean, sharp sound of a microphone being switched off. The tape ended, spooling into the silence of an empty reel. Liam sat in the ringing quiet, the doctor's final desperate revelation echoing in his mind. An inverted wave, phase cancellation. It was the principle behind noise-cancelling headphones. A sound wave could be negated by broadcasting its exact opposite, its mirror image. It was a long shot, a desperate theory from a dying man, but it was the first hint of a weapon, a way to fight back. As if sensing his train of thought, the protocol retaliated. It started with a low crackle from the observation room. The large, bell-shaped speakers in the patient chambers, dormant for 50 years, began to emit a low, guttural static. Then, with a violent screech of protesting metal, the iron bed frame in Chamber 1 began to vibrate. It didn't just shake. It moved. It slid a few inches across the concrete floor, dragged by the focused, intense vibration of the 19 Hz hum. The entity was no longer just whispering. It was flexing its muscles. It was demonstrating its physical power over its environment. The bed frame in Chamber 2 began to move. Then soon, all of them were scraping and sliding across the floors of their cells. A cacophony of screeching, grinding metal, a symphony of industrial horror conducted by a phantom frequency. It was a physical assault of sound designed to deafen him, to disorient him, to drive him mad with chaotic noise, so he couldn't think, so he couldn't act on Finch's last hope. But the noise had the opposite effect. It broke Liam's paralysis and filled him with a cold, focused rage. He would not be Finch. He would not be patient. He was not a subject. He was the operator. He launched himself at his equipment, his mind racing, pulling on his years of audio engineering knowledge. He had a portable signal generator in his kit, a small but powerful device capable of producing any frequency he needed. Phase inversion was a simple function on his digital recorder. He could generate a 19 Hz sine wave, invert its phase, and broadcast it through his own portable speaker. He could fight the hum with its own ghost. The noise from the chambers was becoming deafening, the entire wing shaking with the resonant chaos. The lights on his recorder flickered as the powerful vibrations interfered with the sensitive electron. He worked frantically, his fingers flying across the controls, his eyes locked on the screen. He brought up the spectral analysis display. There was the entity's signal, a clean, sharp peak of warm, orange light at 19 Hz. He calibrated his generator. On the screen, a second waveform appeared, a cool, blue line. He fine-tuned the frequency until it was a perfect match. Then, with a single keystroke, he inverted the phase. The blue wave flipped, becoming a perfect mirror image of the orange one. Theory was now practice. All he had to do was broadcast it. The screeching from the chambers reached a crescendo. A high, singing whine started to emanate from the large observation window as the glass began to vibrate in sympathy with the assault. A thin, hairline crack appeared at the corner of the pane, racing across the glass like a bolt of frozen lightning. The protocol was trying to break through, to destroy him before he could deploy his weapon. It was a race against the collapse of his world. His hand hovered over the activate button on his screen, the button that would unleash his counter-frequency. He was about to try and erase a ghost, with a ghost of its own. The world did not explode. It imploded. The moment Liam's finger made contact with the screen, there was no sound, no boom, no climactic clash. Instead, the small, powerful speaker on his console emitted a wave of pure, weaponized silence. The chaotic, deafening screech of the vibrating bed frames, the high-pitched whine of the cracking window, the deep, bone-rattling 19 Hz hum, all of it vanished, instantly cancelled out, erased from the acoustic spectrum, as if it had never existed. The effect was profoundly disorienting. Liam felt a sickening lurch in his inner ear, the kind of vertigo you get in a rapidly descending elevator. The sudden absence of the oppressive infrasound was a physical shock, leaving a hollow, ringing void in its wake. The air in the room, which had been thick and vibrating with malicious energy, was now thin, dead, and utterly still. He had created a perfect pocket of null space, a silent scream in the heart of the storm. For a breathtaking second, it worked. The iron bed frames froze mid-scrape. The vibrations ceased. The hissing speakers fell quiet. He had done it. Finch's desperate theory was true. But the protocol was not a simple sound wave. It was a sentient pattern, a virus woven into the fabric of the building. And it would not be erased so easily. It began to fight back. Deprived of its foundational frequency, its very backbone, the entity's control over the physical world began to unravel. Its final, desperate throes were not a focused attack, but a chaotic, digital tantrum. A new sound erupted from the speakers in the patient chambers, not a hum or a whisper, but a high-frequency shriek of corrupted data, like a dial-up modem screaming in agony. The whispers returned, but they were no longer coherent. They were a shattered, glitching chorus of 1,000 different voices. Finch, Patient 12, and countless others, all speaking at once, their words sliced, looped and stitched together into a terrifying, meaningless collage of madness. Listen, 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 listen. A voice like Finch's chattered, skipping, like a broken record. In the silence, silence is the key. Patient Wells' voice hissed, distorted, and warped. The lights on Liam's equipment flickered and died, then flared back to life, the screens filling with cascades of corrupted, neon green code. The entity, unable to maintain its physical hold, was now attacking his technology, its last bastion of influence. Then the window gave way, with a final, explosive crack. The massive pane of fractured observation glass did not just shatter. It disintegrated. A wave of pressure, the last gasp of the cancelled frequency, blew the glass inwards in a sparkling, deadly cloud of crystalline dust and jagged shards. Liam threw himself from his chair, curling into a ball on the floor, his arms wrapped around his head, as the shrapnel rained down around him, embedding itself in the walls and his equipment. The raw, unfiltered cold of the patient chambers flooded the control room, along with the deafening roar of the blizzard from the main asylum. Its sound no longer muffled by the sealed wing. The storm, which had been a silent partner to the entity, was now a physical invader. Snow, fine and dry as sand, whipped through the shattered window, swirling around the room in ghostly white vortexes. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The screaming data stream from the speakers cut out. The glitching whispers ceased. The last of the corrupted code vanished from Liam's screens, replaced by their normal, stable readouts. The violent, chaotic energy that had filled the wing was gone, utterly and completely. Liam cautiously uncurled himself, his body aching, a thin cut on his cheek stinging from the cold. He pushed himself to his feet and stared at the scene of devastation. The control room was a wreck. The floor was covered in a glittering carpet of shattered glass and a fine dusting of snow. The iron bed frames in the patient cells were silent, their violent dance finished. He looked at his recorder's screen. The spectral analysis was flat. The angry orange peak of the protocol's frequency was gone. The cool blue line of his counter signal was also gone. There was nothing. He put on his headphones, his hands shaking slightly. He cranked the gain to maximum. He heard the hiss of the amplifier. He heard the distant, lonely howl of the blizzard from the main building. He heard the faint, rhythmic ticking of his own heart, picked up by the sensitive microphones. But that was all. The silence he was listening to now was different. The heavy, oppressive, full silence was gone. This was a true silence, an empty silence, a clean silence. He had won. He had faced down a 50-year-old ghost and erased it. He was alive. He let out a shaky breath, a sound that was half sob, half laugh. He was still trapped. The blizzard was still raging, and the door was still a wall of ice. But the immediate, existential threat was gone. He began to assess the damage to his gear. Miraculously, his primary recorder, shielded by his own body, was mostly unharmed. He tapped the screen, bringing up the file directory, and that's when he saw it. One new file had been created in the final, chaotic moments of the conflict. It wasn't an audio file. Its extension was simply .dat, a generic data file. Its title was automatically generated, a string of corrupted characters and numbers. But at the very end, 2 words were clear and legible. Patient 12. His blood ran cold. He hadn't erased it. Not all of it. A fragment, a tiny piece of the original signal, had survived had it latched onto his system, a digital parasite seeking a new host. With a sense of profound dread, he selected the file. His system didn't know how to open it. It asked him what program he wanted to use. He hesitated, his mind flashing with images of a computer virus, of the entity rebuilding itself inside his hard drive. But he had to know. He chose the most basic program he had, a simple text editor, a plain, black window with a blinking cursor. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, a single line of clean, white text appeared on the screen, as if being typed by an unseen hand. It was not a threat. It was not a corrupted scream. It was a simple, coherent sentence. A final, poignant echo from the very first ghost in the machine. Thank you for listening.
The words hung there in the cold, silent room. It wasn't a protocol, it was her, the original patient, her consciousness, her memory, trapped for half a century as the seed of the malevolent program. In erasing the protocol, he had freed her. This wasn't a threat. It was a final, grateful farewell. Liam stared at the screen, a profound, unexpected wave of sadness washing over him. He had come here to document a place, but he had become a part of its story. An exorcist who had laid a tortured spirit to rest. The text faded, and the file erased itself. He was truly alone now. The blizzard howled, the snow swirled through the shattered window, and the cold deepened its hold. The fight was over, but the struggle for survival was just beginning.